Well, a couple of folks are still joining us, but I think we'll get things kicked off just to try to stay on time here. If you're buying HR tech, you're in the HR tech ecosystem, you're on the right call. Today, we're going to dive into as many specific tactics that we can for people who are trying to evaluate their HR tech stack. What should we add? What should we maybe cut back? How do we get more out of what we have? How do we think about trends like artificial intelligence and really where is the puck going to? And our goal here is just to help people do their jobs better and be armed with some of the secrets that we've learned from being in these ecosystems, probably spending too much time looking at all these systems and how they've evolved over the last couple of years. And I know at least two of the people on the call, or sorry, two of the people on this panel have built their own GPTs, which is pretty cool. And we can talk about some of those things as well. Clapping for GPTs. Yep, we like that. We like anything interactive, by the way. Hey, Carrie. So if you've got questions, when you RSVP'd, we got a bunch of questions, and that's amazing. We'll be answering some of those questions throughout. If you have other questions, please put them into the chat. Let us know. If it's hyper relevant, we'll try to answer it in real time. If not, we'll probably answer it at the end of the presentation. But that's really what we're here to do. Talk about HR tech, arm you with some tools, help everybody just do their jobs better, hopefully make what in many cases is sort of a annoying and full of brain damage sort of process of evaluating and optimizing your HR tech stack, make it a bit easier and hopefully increase your odds of success as well. Without further ado, let me do a couple of introductions here, and I'll start with my co-panelists, and I'll start with you, Jeremy, who provided a nice, concise bio for me. I hate reading off a script, but I'm going to do it here just because it's a lot easier. So Jeremy is a tireless advocate for RecOps and TA Ops and has helped bring more awareness to the specialty. He's the co-founder of the RecOps Collective, which I highly suggest you check out, chief editor of RecOps Roundup, which is the only weekly RecOps specific newsletter. He's the builder of RecOps, the most popular RecOps focused GPT and OpenAI store. A guy who's built his own GPT. Love to learn more about that throughout this conversation. A community organizer for Ashby, great ATS, Canada.fyi, another great HR tech system, and OneRec. He is excited to see one of his dreams become a reality with the RecOps conference in Chicago happening October 24th, 25th. Congratulations, Jeremy, on the conference. Super exciting stuff.
Thank you. And yes, I did try to see how many times could I throw in the word RecOps there to see if it was like Beetlejuice. I did not, however, know that Beetlejuice was coming out last week. So
there you go.
Happy to be here. So.
I had 17 on my bingo card, so you got 2 more to add.
There you go. Recruiting operations. I like the nomenclature. Yeah. So Jackson provided a less succinct bio here, so I'm not going to be able to read it verbatim. But let me try to summarize because the guy's just done a lot, right? So Jackson's the EVP and CHRO of Sonova Energy International, where he just kind of does everything human capital solutions. Sonova is one of the fastest growing companies in the renewable energy space, focus on empowering energy independence for our country. As previously as the founder of 90 Consulting, and it sounds like you were just doing a lot of different things for lots of different premier companies from a kind of people ops perspective, including some TPG-backed companies, et cetera. And of course, you have your own newsletter as well, Talent Sherpa. So Jeremy and Jackson, thank you guys so much for joining me today on the call. A quick background on myself. My name is Phil Strazula. I am the founder of Select Software Reviews. I started my career off working in HR tech, realized that buying HR tech is really hard. And so our whole mission is to help make it easier. We've got lots of content on our website. Everything's for free. We're not consultants. We don't charge anybody anything. And you can go on and read about payroll software, applicant tracking systems, which about 100,000 companies a month do. 100,000 companies a month use our research. And then if you want help, you can book a free call with one of our HR tech advisors. These are people who know a lot about HR technology. And so if you don't want to go and do all the work yourself, you can tell them about your business, and they'll basically point you in the right direction, make introductions to the right vendors, and you can skip talking to the 23-year-old when you sign up for these. The other thing that I will say is that for our HR tech advisor calls, we're closing in on doing 500 of these this year. And in celebration of that, I think for the next 30 people that book one, we're going to buy you and your colleague coffee. So you get a gift card to Starbucks, and it's actually a Visa gift card you can use anywhere. I'll drop a link in the chat in a minute or so to book one of those. But yeah, free coffee, free HR tech advice, pretty good deal. So with that all said, let's sort of get into the meat of the conversation here. And I think, Jeremy, if you don't mind kicking us off, I'd love to hear your advice for the key areas of HR tech investment that companies should be thinking about for Q4 and beyond.
Yeah, so I think when thinking about kind of Q4 and beyond right now, I mean, obviously we're still seeing really big advancements in AI, so it's impossible to avoid that. I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on that. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing a lot more of conversations around, especially on channels, conversations with other folks when it comes to HR tech, is now also seeing that tool consolidation pieces and that interconnectedness that we started to see kind of starting to build up 2022 in rec tech throughout 2023, and now has sort of become a staple where you see more and more brands talking about themselves as all-in-one platforms. I think one of the things that I'm starting to also see when it comes to HR tech is more of this commitment to analytics. And one of the things that I'm looking at and seeing is, how are these analytics translating into actions? How are people using those? Because I know that in the past, it's been a lot of survey-based, a lot of things like Lattice, a lot of how are we going to get feedback from our internal folks when it comes to HR tech, and kind of seeing how that extends in 2024. And then I think the last thing that I'm looking at is, everybody is talking about doing more with less. And while I think a lot of people, when they think of doing more with less, they're thinking of more people. So still continuing that layoff trend that we're seeing, which I think is unfortunate. But I want to kind of propose a different way of looking at that, at least when looking at HR tech in Q4 and 2025, which is looking at it from a lens of how many more steps, how many more clicks. And I think that what we're starting to see around a lot of tech is this increase of ease of use. So limiting those clicks, limiting how to get to the information that you need without needing to be more like this. While the sophistication increases, the clicks aren't necessarily increasing with that. And I think in a large part, and Jackson, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, I think a lot of that is kind of coming around because of how people are interacting with GPTs and how people are interacting with getting information and using natural language. And I think we're starting to see that more and more being built out within tools. So those are just kind of a couple of things that I would say leading into 2025, leading into Q4, looking at your tool stack, looking at how things are being interconnected to one another. And then also, how GPTs are actually also just kind of changing the way people work and how we go about trying to get information.
What are and by the way, I'm sorry that I didn't have this link handy. I put it in the chat if you want to get the free HR tech advice from one of our experts and a bunch of coffee / Visa gift card. Sign up in that link that I just put in the chat. But Jeremy, I'm super interested. What sort of you mentioned analytics? Like, what sort of insights are people trying to pull out, and is that changing at all in the sort of AI landscape that we're in?
I mean, I think that when people are looking at analytics, I think people are trying to find engagement. You're trying to find let's call it like outputs, not necessarily just kind of sentiment analysis, but like the actual output that the individual is having without needing that individual to go back and do like a manual input to give you that information. So what can be inferred. So I think that that's something that people are certainly looking at and looking towards, because it, again, goes back to doing more with less and ease of use. I think the other thing that is certainly something that's been very interesting to follow and be talked about is, can we get these analytics without necessarily needing middle management to do so? Can people sort of self-organize? Can a team self-organize without needing a manager to guide? And I think that comes down to cultural elements. And I think people are starting to really try to hone in and figure out, how do we measure and identify what our culture is, based on some of the tools that we're using that maybe validates that. I think.
Would you,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just kind of curious, like, would you use like would you like export your employee engagement data and upload it to ChatGPT? Would you build your own GPT, or would you use one of these like natural language first interfaces that are built into one of these tools? Like, what are you seeing the most common or effective way to do this is?
Yeah, well, and I think that every company is kind of approaching it a little bit differently. I think that there are some companies that are just, let's work at a breakneck speed. We don't necessarily need to work on building our own internal tool. While I think that is something that can be done, I don't, obviously we don't know the extent of how this information would be shared. So obviously you don't want to have personally identified information being shared externally. But I think that what I'm starting to see is that a number of companies are building sort of like using OpenAI or using Anthropic or any of these large language models. I'm seeing a lot more folks taking that and maybe building internal company GPTs so that they just load up their docs into those spaces, and that employees can go and sort of interact with something that maybe feels a little bit more natural and doesn't feel maybe as judgmental as they might feel talking to another human being. It's just kind of an interesting thing.
How long does it take to do something like that? Like, is that like a 5-month project, or is that like 10 hours?
For when I think about my building of my GPT, and what I used to do that, it was not a very difficult process. The harder part about it was you had to make sure that your documentation was tight. And when you have that tighter documentation, it allows for those building of those GPTs relatively quickly. I know, for example, one of my, let's call it an annoyance with OpenAI's, is I had all of these other documents that I wanted to add. It capped me at 40. So then it becomes, how do you consolidate your documentation in such a way that it still feels natural and easy for you if you need to just swap it out versus keep it in?
Yeah.
And so those are kinds of the things. But I do want to kick it up to Jackson. I mean, based on things that you're hearing on your side, I mean, has anything I said kind of resonated? Anything else that you sort of want to yes and in on, or say, no, that's completely incorrect, I'm not even seeing that?
I can't believe you said that. Now, I'm exactly. I'm 100% with you on that, Jeremy. But if we were to pull back and maybe look at it from a different frame of reference, it might also be helpful depending on kind of where you're sitting in the process of trying to figure out what the path looks like.
Yeah.
If you think about what are we trying to do, it is overcome something that the human capital field candidly has been so woefully behind on, and I don't mean to be broadly disparaging, but we are if you're in a crawl, walk, run scenario, we are still crawling when it comes to people analytics. And we've kind of patted ourselves on the back a little bit, that we have scorecards that are balanced, and we share those with business leaders in a way that have very traditional metrics on it. What Jeremy's talking about, and the impact of what he's talking about, is how do you democratize access to data? And the large language models really have a keen opportunity to do two things that are different. Number one is you can actually democratize it by allowing people that don't have SQL training, don't need to do any coding, and have the ability to ask a question the way a normal person would ask a question, and allow that model to then give you answers that are bespoke to the exact situation you're trying to handle. That's way different than kind of the way we've done it in the past, which is you have 3 different ways to calculate turnover. It depends on the size and the scaling of your organization. One size fits all, you pick it, and that's how you manage against it. And honestly, it doesn't translate into actionable outcomes. When you're that kind of high level, it's got to be bespoke. I think the second thing that it does is it allows a lot more innovation when it comes to how do I think about things. So, for example, in the talent acquisition space, I would guess most people talk about recruiter performance around time to fill, average time to fill. That is such an old way of managing it. And it largely was built up historically based upon recruiters that wanted to get a number that they felt good about. And so you kind of don't worry about the button seat. You don't worry about the stuff that they can't control. And instead, you just have a number that you then average, and you say, hey, I feel good about it. I want to get these done in 60 days. I have 3 of them. My average is 60. I'm happy. And yet, if you peel back the onion a little bit, you say, I may have gotten 3 done. 1 was done in a day because I had the guy sitting on the sideline, and 2 were done in 89 and 90 days respectively. You add those 3 together at 60 days. Does that recruiter performance hit the mark? No, they got lucky and they were off by 50% twice. I use that as an example of it allows you to then start thinking about innovation from a frame of reference change, right? So what is it that the hiring manager needs? They need predictability. What does that predictability mean? It means we have a different way of thinking about how we measure performance, and you put it into a natural language, large language model, and we can revolutionize the way we think about people analytics.
And are you advocating for, like, how do you actually do this in practice, right? Is it you are doing some sort of like export from your ATS and maybe CRM if you're big enough to have one? Are you using the stuff that's built into it? Are you seeing systems that have some of these like LLMs capabilities? What's sort of like the thing people can do, I guess, to get at some of these numbers?
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and we'll certainly, as we talk about ATSs and stuff like that, I know that people ask that question, that we're starting to see a lot of is on the ATS side, that incorporation of that natural language processing to find specific information. I know Ashby's got theirs built in when it comes to certain elements of the reporting, and certainly with their release of their AI sourcing pieces, there's that. I know that Gem has talked about it. Atlas Technologies is doing their thing. Screen Loop, Dover to a certain extent. All those ATSs are sort of working and incorporating the natural language pieces to it. I think one of the things that is also kind of still key front of mind when it comes to actually just the data has been around people still trying to get to figuring out quality of hire. And that has also led to an impact on a number of tools in the space, like your Crosschecks, your Equitables, Presidios, who are building these analytic tools that are there meant to help and meant to take in all of these inputs. And I think one of the really, I'll call it a beautiful thing over the last couple of years, especially as people have been consolidating, has been that tools that previously didn't talk to each other or talk to each other at kind of an okay rate now talk to each other much better. So you can get better data out of it and use that data to make more data-driven decisions. Now, one of the things I will say is people are still talking about quality of hire. That's still going on as a debate about how are we getting to it. And I think right now, what people have started to kind of still settle on is, well, we'll do surveys at 30, 60, 90, 180 days. And when I think about that, much to what Jackson was talking about, you hire the you get one person in day one because you were you had the capacity plan in place, you had that buy-in from other departments. You got that person in one day, now you're off on the 80 and 90 days. I think one of the things with quality of hires, you have to look at like, what are you hiring this person to do and what are those impacts? Because then you can start measuring those impacts out of like objectively, not using subjective measures.
Right.
And I think back to an earlier story in my career where essentially I was working for a telecommunications company. Somebody they hired was only around for a year, but that person ended up building a foundational technology that's made that company billions of dollars. Does that mean that that person was a poor hire? No, their quality of their impact was exceedingly, they only needed to be there for that year, and that company only needed them for that year to be able to lay down the foundation, get everything going, and push down the hill. That's an impactful hire. That would be a good quality hire.
Mm.
So it's a multivariant analysis that we are trying to solve for with one algebraic equation.
Yep.
It doesn't work. So that's where these kind of broader things can allow you at least to get closer. You probably, I don't know how you get to the example that Jeremy put together, but that's exactly right. But in the absence of perfection, we can do a lot better than what we do today, which is basically math that answers the question, would I hire them again?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that tools, especially on the HR tech side, are now focused on, is like, how do we know that this is somebody that we should hire again from empirical evidence versus just like a subjective measure. And that's, I think, something that certainly as we talk about the tech landscape, as we talk about going into Q4 and beyond, is how do we make sure that the things that we're measuring and the tools that we're using to measure those are copacetic with one another to do that.
And are there any, before we kind of close out this topic around what's going on Q4 and beyond, are there any kind of last points around like tools or areas of interest that either of you are particularly excited about that should be on somebody's radar?
Jackson, you want to go first?
No.
Okay, I will. I think that when I'm looking at tools, one of the key things that I want to see is how well are they listening to their customer base and pushing out those updates and listening and those innovations. And so when I kind of look across the sphere, there are a number of companies, some that I've already mentioned, who I find work really well with their customer base and work well also going into intake calls with other companies where maybe they didn't win the deal, but they certainly have identified, they've been using that active listening to identify an issue that's coming up or that is a trend. And so when I do think about that, I do think about Equitable and how they're building your people analytics platform. I do think about the Ashbys who do a good job of, pushing code very quickly. And then also things like candidate.fyi, where, people say stuff, they're listening, they're going, they're building quickly, and they're not just building to push something out quickly, they're building it effectively so it doesn't break. They're not rushing to market with it.
I think one of the things for me before we move on is I think if you've been in this industry for a while, you've been burned, you've had it probably at least 1 or 2, maybe 10 negative experiences with HR tech vendors. And what's sort of interesting is that there is a new breed of vendor that has emerged probably in the last like 10 or so years, maybe a bit longer than that at this point. And these companies, it's better UI, UX, better integrations, more intuitive, etc. And they've pushed the incumbents a little bit as well to do better. Cause like, let's say ADP, for example, not to always pick on them, but like, I don't think they can just be ADP, the brand, over the next 10 years and survive. They're just going to get eaten up. And so they have to be better too. But I think a lot of people are just like, oh God, like HR tech. But there actually are a lot of good solutions, whether you're talking about something as specific as, people analytics or something as broad as HCM or HRIS. So,
Yeah.
Jackson, any other last points on this before we move on?
Yeah, look, I'll take the opportunity that Jeremy gave me earlier. Look, I think the thing I'm seeing in the market today that is really really um, exciting to see where this thing is going to go over probably the next 3 to 5 years is a focus um, on our ability to shift the frames of references of the questions. If you look historically, no matter what kind of data we're looking at, all of our answers have been very, very set and from a singular point of reference. And we, as HR practitioners, have gone to the business and said, this is the important measure for you. But generally speaking, they were the things that help us measure our operational performance and not necessarily placed from a frame of reference of what the end user needs to be. Sometimes that's the business leader, sometimes that's the candidate and experience, sometimes that's the employee perception, all of which allows us to ask different questions and answer them with a much higher level of sophistication than what we have traditionally done. To me, I think that's, we're just breaking the ice of where I think some of this stuff can go.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's super exciting. Moving on to the next topic, I'd love to dive into a conversation around how do we basically get the most out of our existing HR tech stacks? Everybody's paying for systems, and how do we, either upgrade what we've got or just kind of squeeze the juice out of what we've got? And so I guess, where I would probably start with this is to think about, to one, go to your client account manager and just kind of like sit down with them and be like, here's everything that's going on in our people organization, our recruiting organization. What can you help out with? Because we're looking at other stuff, right? Like, this contract's in jeopardy. I would do something like that. Maybe, not everybody would have the comfort to do something like that. But obviously the economic incentive of your account manager to think, oh, geez, I got to kind of work to keep these guys is a good one. And how do they keep you? They get you using more stuff. And so you're going to get a much deeper appreciation for all the different functionality that the tool has. The other tactic that I would look at is every vendor, well, many vendors have a webinar series. And what do they do their webinars about? Stuff that their tool does. And you don't have to watch all the webinars, but you can go to their webinar archive and just be like, oh, okay, our ATS is talking about automated sourcing, talent pools, enriching candidate profiles, blah, 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 blah. Actually, we need sourcing and we need to, enrich our existing database, et cetera. They must do that. There's a, really, really good bet that those tools are doing that. And so those would kind of be like my two tactics to make the most of your existing stack. I don't know, Jeremy and Jackson, if you all have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. But Jackson, do you want to go first? Because
I do this time. It's my
yeah, I'll let you go first, and I'll go next.
Yeah, I guess a question of you, Phil. To what degree, when you are working with folks, do you find that we are already paying for things and not using them?
It's massive. We talk to HR teams all day long to help them figure out what HR tech they should buy. And we ask them, what's the existing stack look like? And many times it's like, well, did you know, this tool can do that or what have you, right? Like I'm looking for performance management. Oh, okay. Like, did you know that your HRIS has a module? It's not going to be as powerful as Culture Amp or Lattice, but it might be good enough for what you need. And here's how to use it. Here's some best practices. We just saved you, X amount of money.
Yeah, that's what I expected the answer to be. In my private practice, when I had my consulting firm, we dealt a lot with carve-outs and companies that were going through ownership transitions. And one of the things I found, and love your thoughts on it too, Phil and Jeremy, are whoever the top of the house HR person was tended to build what they'd seen before, without necessarily looking at saying what needs to be built here in this moment for the business thesis that we have today. If you're in an 18-month flip type organization owned by a platinum equity, which doesn't want to hold anything for more than 24 months, your focus on your tech stack is going to be radically different than a TPG that is really about building value, going public, and building long-term a long-term viable product. So, how do you guys feel help on that piece too? I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think realistically, buying HR tech, nobody likes to do it. Most people don't have the time to do it. I was talking to somebody a week ago that, they had the police come for an employee relations issue to the office, and it's like it's hard to think about what HCM to use when you got the police in your office. And so it's just one of these things where it's like, let's just push the easy button, and it's the easy button in the short term, but in the long term, it's better to have something that's employee friendly and is going to provide the right analytics, et cetera. And so that's what we always try to push people to do, is just spend a little bit more time. We can many times short circuit it. Like, it's not like you have to evaluate 10 different solutions. Like, here are the two that are going to be the best solution for you. But I would push everybody to do it, because even if you're in a platinum equity backed company and it's going to be sold in 18 months, you might still be there. Like, platinum equity might not be there, but you might still be there. And so you want to make sure that you're doing the right things to reflect positively on yourself.
Right.
Well, and to kind of yes and on Phil, I think that when people think that to the point of, oh, we need to go and get this, sometimes it's that mindset of like, you always have to look for something new. And if you don't know, or people that you're talking to don't know that you can actually maximize, increase the usage of your tool, it's sort of that piece of things doesn't help you. It's sort of like, we all probably have more high-powered computers than we probably need to in our house, and we're probably using 15% of what it can do. But we need somebody to sit down with us, talk to us, and say, hey, by the way, did you know that if you do this sort of shortcut, you're now actually going to save time? Now you're more maximizing the thing that you use. And that's why a lot of times that I've advocated for my internal teams, I've advocated for other groups to do this, helped through RecOps Collective in doing this, has been devoting some time at least once a quarter to like a learning day. And to Phil's point, you could stack a number of CSMs over things and invite people along so that they can understand it. But it's really committed to that knowledge piece for how you can then maximize more, know how to do more, because oftentimes people don't want to adopt something because they think it's going to be more work, or they think that it's change is scary. So how do you make it more accessible? And then I think the other thing too is, with all of the information, we're sometimes in information overload, or like overload, and not overlord, but information is our overload.
Well, maybe that too.
But I think that one of the things that I've loved about, for example, like Poetry, which is a tool from Adam Gordon, has been, okay, how do we take everything across the board, centralize it real nice and easy for people to find in a good location that isn't like this Google Doc links to that Google Doc that links to this Notion page that links back to this spreadsheet. Because I think you have to think through, how do you make it really, really easy for people to get to where they want to be, and do that.
I think one of the topics I'd love to talk about is, there's looking at your existing stack and squeezing the most juice out of it. There's also thinking about what's the stuff we don't need, and how do we evaluate and decrease our budget there. One of the things I'm always amazed, and this is true of our business, it's true of probably most other companies, is you forget the stuff that you're paying for. And the number one thing that I always tell HR teams, and it's a little scary to do this, but I think it's essential, is to sit down with your CFO and understand what are the costs that are being allocated to my part of the organization. Because you've always got, it's like, oh yeah, a recruiter bought that LinkedIn recruiter seat 2 years ago, we completely forgot about, right? Or whatever the case may be, there's always something there. And every part of the organization, and the CFO knows this too, every part of the organization buys stuff, doesn't use it. And to kind of just like be like, let's go through the P&L and own up to it. You're doing everybody a service, and it's going to reflect positively on you, and probably free up some budget too. So that's kind of like where I tell people to start. I don't know, Jeremy and Jackson, if you all have some tactics around understanding how do we save budget on what we've already got.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what it boils down to is sometimes when thinking about TA, or at least on the people side, we tend to focus on the people side of it as opposed to thinking about it like a business. And I think to that extent, sometimes that's in a lot of ways maybe forfeited our seat at the table. Now I see that getting better and people talking about it. But I think to your point, a lot of those tools that have been built that we all use don't necessarily make it easy for us to pull that information naturally to see like, okay, on this $10,000 a year contract, we're really using the full 10,000 with all of the features. And so I think when you're able to show up in a meeting and show up, especially on the TA side, and I know Headcount 365 and Eric Giannis talk about this a lot, where it's you can show up and you can talk about OpEx and CapEx and things like that, that changes the relationship of the dynamic, because now people don't just sort of see you coming in and saying, we need more people. They see you coming in and saying, okay, as a business, relative to the revenue, this is how much of that revenue we're trying to occupy. And we're trying to make sure that we are maximizing every dollar that you're putting into us so that it's not just sort of, hey, cool money, more event, whatever.
Yeah, so that's a yes and. Everything Jeremy said, I agree with completely. A couple of additional thoughts to it. First, I think HR people, especially at more senior levels, need to be fluent in the language of business. And if you don't understand how the math works in the accounting and FP&A systems, start there. I think the second is.
And how do you start there? Like, do I get lunch with the CFO? Do I, get my MBA?
Well, here's a unsolicited plug. So I actually am putting out the longest thing I've ever done in Talent Sherpa, and I'm still trying to figure out if I put it out once or if I break it up. But it's all the financial terms HR people should need to know and how it applies to what they do. So that'd be one way of approaching it, and that should be coming out soon. I keep adding to it. Unfortunately, I keep rewriting it and say, "Oh, okay, I can be more clear on here." Because candidly, like most HR people don't necessarily understand how things get measured and how to have a good return on investment conversation and burn rate and things that are really important as to how you make investments. So that would be a way. Most people I don't think can go to a short-term MBA, but that's where you sit down and you have some conversations with your head of FP&A, depending on the size of the business. Maybe it's your CFO, and you become their best friend, and you say, like, I need you to teach me how you think about that so that you can use that same approach in crafting your answers. And then the second thing I would add to the yes and is we sometimes get stuck in looking at the system and the cost associated with the system. I'd encourage us to also look at the cost of the wraparound processes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, at least in my experience, found that it's the wraparound process that either wasn't designed to enable the system to work efficiently, that adds cost, or it is the wraparound process that is not well defined and drives quality issues, which drives change, error, and rework in the underlying data. And there are dollars that fall out when you kind of look at it more holistically instead of only the technology solution.
Yeah, you have to look at the people and you have to look at the tools, because
people, tools, and time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very oft overlooked, and I'm going to keep an eye out for that financial overview. I think it's super interesting. Somebody just DM me asking for the link again to do the free HR tech chats with an HR tech expert and get your free gift card as well. I'm going to put that link back in the chat just so everybody has it, especially the folks that that joined a little bit late. I guess, I wanted to cover one last topic here, and then we can get into some of the questions that were submitted when people RSVP'd. And that's really balancing innovation with cost effectiveness in the HR tech stack. We'd love to all have the Rolls Royce and maybe have 10 different cars. I'd like a Bugatti and a Ferrari and all this stuff, but I don't have the money for that, unfortunately. And Jackson, I don't know if you can walk us through how you would think about this problem of cost versus what can help.
Yeah, and before we do that, let maybe even pull back just a little bit. And what is it about human capital leaders that we need to do better than anybody else? And I think it falls into two camps. One, you need to predict outcomes, you need to identify root causes, and you need to prescribe actions. Either to take advantage of things that you want to make sure you're doing, or to buttress those things that aren't working out the way you need it to work out. So you do that, set that aside. The second is to smartly separate what you have to work on now from what you can improve later. And that's the hardest one, because if anyone's like me, and I have the waistline to prove it, the eyes are always bigger than the stomach. So trying to figure out how to take both of those in, it starts with making sure you have strategic alignment with what the organizational objectives are, which is, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the productivity and how do we plan to measure it? What's the employee experience? How do we enable data-driven decision making? So innovation is a tool towards an outcome, not an isolated initiative. Another thing to think about is modular and I think scalable solutions, especially as you're in kind of the SMB space. I think that flexibility enables a lot of goodness that comes from it, especially as you're in organizations that are just trying to figure out either in a unique business challenge with headwinds, whether you have tailwinds and you're trying to grow fast. That flexibility has value in it, and that helps you manage cost if you're focused on a modular solution. I think by enabling gradual upgrades, because you don't want to buy stuff that you can't actually execute. I think another thing is to look at cost benefit analysis beyond the initial investment. And if I could underscore and embolden a line, that would be it. We do a really, really poor job in human capital of having the ROI conversation at the same sophistication level that you do with putting, say, a machinery into a factory. There are assumptions based upon that, and we don't make similar assumptions. We think that is hardwired, and ours is soft math. They're the same if you can make the argument well. And if given the underinvestment in these kind of things historically, if you can get into the ROI game, your hurdle rate is going to you're gonna chin that bar faster than anyone outside of it in the business, because candidly, you just haven't had the opportunity to play in that space. You win those arguments. On the flip side, if it's a cost game, you lose cost games. So you have to change the way you think about it. I think another way is to think about leveraging AI and automation for process efficiency. And as I mentioned earlier, you designed the wraparound process to enable efficiency, and you don't change your system to enable your preferred wraparound process. And then I think finally is you begin with the end user in mind, and as such, you got to prioritize your user efficiency, user experience, and you really think hard about adoption rates. I may have the best system in the world, and if no one uses it, boom. So if you think about strategic alignment, you think about modular and scalable, you think about cost benefit, and put it into an ROI environment. You think about how to leverage AI and automate, and you think about how to prioritize experience and adoption rates. You can effectively balance innovation with cost efficiency while delivering exactly what your business needs.
Just to very quickly yes and on Jackson, because I agree with everything you said. I think put another direction, you're talking about sort of is the problem that you're dealing with, and this is coming from the fact that I've been in tech for a while, a hardware or software issue. If it's a hardware issue, you can switch things out very, very quickly. If it's a software issue, it's going to take a little bit more time. And you have to understand your organization to do that. So to your, I've never been one to want a Bugatti or a Ferrari. I've been way too afraid of scratching that. And also I live in Los Angeles where my time is actually 60 to 0 over 0 to 60. And I think when I think about that, I think about you have to define the why for anything that you're doing, and that's the problem definition. And then by doing that root cause analysis onto the why, you then can figure out, is this something we're going to be solving with people, or is this something we're going to be solving with a tool? And then if it's going to be people, like on both sides, what's it going to cost? But also, do we really need the Ferrari right now if really all we're doing is going from point A to point B in a walkable distance? Or do we need the Ferrari because we need to get there real fast and it's going to enable us to do so?
Yeah. I like the analogies. I think, we'll get into, we've got a couple of questions here from the crowd. Any other questions, feel free to let us know, drop them in the chat. I think the first question, it's worded a little bit strangely, but my understanding of this question, and sorry, not to pick on the person who wrote it when I'm sure they were, doing this on mobile or something, but effectively, when you're pitching to management, hey, we want to make, this is our recommendation. How do we basically show the work that's been put into this thing? Jeremy or Jackson, I don't know if either of you want to take that.
Yeah. Let me try to, coming back to looking at the business strategy through a talent lens and identifying what you're solving for. That's step one. Step two is then making the connection between the technology and the return on investment as to how it drives their broader numbers. If you can do that well, then you win every argument, because the ROI is so exceptionally high relative to anything else that folks are looking at. And that's because they've been investing in other things for 100 years and they haven't really invested in this space. So an example, you may say, I want to put in a solution that allows me to have a better manager employee communication experience. And I'll just talk about that broadly. You can talk about that as what it would cost to put in a system to capture things. You'll lose the argument. However, if you want to talk about what is it we're trying to accomplish in this part of the organization, if we had increased alignment and performance feedback to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction and we're all moving together, and that we are providing high quality feedback relative to that, then you talk about how do you want to think about measuring it both from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. And then here's the solution that allows that. And if we put this in, I believe you will see that top number that you're interested in moving. That's how you win the argument.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. It's basically proving you did the work, putting it together in a way that aligns with the value that you can provide to the business, and just really realizing you got to fight for everything you can get in your organization. So very good advice. We had a question about what's the best HR system for school districts. I think that's the perfect question to ask on one of these kind of bespoke one-on-one advisor calls. Again, the link's in the chat where you can be like, here's how big the school district is. Here's what we need. Is it, teachers? Is it all staff? Is it blah, 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 all these different things. That's something that advisor will be able to give you a really good short list with finding a little bit more context there. Another question we had was just ATS recommendations kind of in general. Jeremy, I don't know if you want to tick through some of your preferred ATSs.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I'm looking at all the ATSs that are coming out now and doing what they're doing, I'm looking for like 4 things, which is innovation, ease of use, interconnectedness, and cost. And I deliberately have cost kind of last there because I think that when thinking about your ATS, you have to think about it culturally. What does it work? If you're the kind of culture where you're like, everything needs to be measured very, very deeply and intensely, and that's what you care about, then there are going to be certain ATSs out there that will cater to that. But I think that to a point that Jackson made earlier, it's like nobody got fired for hiring IBM or for buying IBM.
Yeah.
It's that same sort of mindset in recruiting where a lot of people are very sort of like, oh my God, I don't want to make the wrong decision with my ATS because it's never, we'll lose all credibility there. But I think you have to understand your culture. So when I'm thinking about ATSs that I recommend to folks, if you are super data driven and you're really, really trying to go hard at it, at that element, you're probably looking at Ashby. If you're looking at some, I know that Greenhouse has certainly built new features. The employee network has certainly also been building out their feature set and how things can plug into it. But when I think about when you're looking at things that have like a high ease of use, Ashby can be a little bit click heavy for some folks, and you need to kind of have a dedicated resource. You need that. It's a system that you need to take time to learn and study, which is great. But if you are like, hey, I just need something that's going to get me from point A to point B real quick, that would be you're buying a Ferrari to get you 2 blocks type solution. I think through like Jazz HR is very simple, very easy to use, very quick to stand up. Dover, same sort of deal. Dover also being free has that elements. And then I know that, we've talked about that CRM or the CRM ATS conversation. I know Gem has released theirs. That's something to give a look to. And then just some up and comers that I think are fun and interesting to look at. Prologue out of the UK has been introducing a model where it's candidate driven over company driven, which I think is a really kind of a unique look at the ATS space, something certainly to be talked about in the future, especially as technology has grown and scheduling and things have grown. Do you need to have prescribed process from the company, or could you, to a certain extent, allow candidates, especially candidates who are neurodiverse, could they sort of pick and choose, hey, I want to, I'm not good in front of people make me anxious. Could we design an entire flow that caters to that side and still can pull out a really, really great hire? So those are just kind of a few companies that I think of and that I think about pretty regularly. And then again, I'm looking at Atlas and how they're building, they're developing their product.
I think it's funny. I don't know how many solutions you just mentioned, but it's like there are just so many of these out there. And Employ Alone is 3 in 1. And that's why we exist. But it's just like it's complicated. But those are, I think, some awesome frameworks to think through. How do we select? The last question that we've got here, and if anybody has any others, drop them in, is what should HR do to be ready for technological changes? How would technology bring maximum impact in an HR role? I think if you're on this webinar, you're doing the right stuff, right? You want to kind of passively consume content that allows you to stay on top of what's changing. I would encourage you to do 1 or 2 demos of like new emerging technologies on a monthly basis, even if you're not in market for, the latest and greatest sourcing tool, the latest and greatest people analytics, whatever. It's interesting to sit in on these and just kind of see like, what are these companies doing? And I'd be looking for like the emerging, venture-backed companies. I wouldn't probably, sit on an ADP's demo. You've probably seen it before, but something that you hadn't heard of before, and it's like, hey, they raised $20 million. Something must be going on here. Let me kind of check it out. Going to a conference every once in a while, maybe that's once a year, maybe it's once a quarter if it's a local thing. Those are the things that I would do to stay on top of everything. And then also just understanding like what's going on with this AI stuff, playing around with it, opening up ChatGPT. I'm going to post a video actually tomorrow on LinkedIn about how do you use ChatGPT to analyze your employee value props, to write a job description, to write a process letter, to write an offer letter. It's like a 3-minute video, powerful tools. You can build your own GPT. I think you could probably build one in 10 or 15 minutes to kind of get a feel for what these things do. And to the second part of the question around what can this do to help you, it's a superpower, right? Like, these tools, they just make you that much more effective, and they automate stuff you don't want to do. They allow you to stand out as an individual rising star in your organization, and allow your organization to reach your goals as a direct result of people ops and recruiting ops at your business. And that is just good for you. So I think there's a lot of incentive. There's also a lot to learn, but taking baby steps and just realizing you're not going to learn everything tomorrow. But if you put the work in, a couple hours a month, you're going to be ahead of your peers, and you're going to be in a good position to make the most of the technology changes that we're seeing currently. I don't know, Jeremy and Jackson, if you have anything to add to that, or final points as we kind of wrap things up here.
Well, let me just add on to what you're saying. The notion that we know everything there is to know about HR technology today is just faulty. It is changing so rapidly, and so the idea of kind of always going on a first date and maybe you find someone you'd rather be with than the person you're with at some point, but if not, it at least kind of helps you understand what might be available that you can add to the relationship with the vendor that you have today. I'm kind of screwing up that metaphor a little bit, but it's getting uncomfortable. But the notion of I have got to be continuously learning about what's available in the marketplace as a progressive human capital leader, like that's your ticket to ride, because not everyone is going to go do that. And to Phil's point, if you invest half an hour a month, you will put yourself in the top quartile. You spend a little bit more than that, you're in the top quintile. And that is how you end up building careers, plus the ability to match it with a good, I'm solving a business problem in a return on investment way. And you're in a really, really good spot as you move on.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think to also add to that, I think there are two points that I think of. One, as a former teacher, I would say the biggest mistake that people make is that they go in thinking that they have to learn everything everywhere all at once. I think what you do is, similarly to working out, you break it down into small parts and you devote an amount of time every day to focusing on just one specific thing, and then stopping so you don't try to overload yourself. I have a block on my calendar every day for 30 minutes to teach myself something new. And I use that block to literally go and read or something. And it might just be 2 paragraphs or something like that, but that's what I'm devoting the time to. I think the other thing too is give yourself credit for the information that you know, and don't try to persuade yourself into thinking that it's something different. If it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck. So if you're going and you're doing these calls and you're talking to these tech companies and it sounds like something you've seen before, it's okay to ask that question of, hey, this looks like the thing that I've seen before. How is this different? Because chances are, if you have that question, your stakeholders are going to have that question, other individuals are going to have that question, and you're going to need to be able to break it down for them in a way that they're going to understand it. And the ability to articulate those answers in a constructive, clear, and concise way, I think also builds on Jackson's point, where it developed your credibility, because people go, this person knows what they're talking about.
Totally agree. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for the amazing questions from the audience. Thanks to Jeremy and Jackson. From here, you're going to get an email with the recording of this, as well as a couple of resources that hopefully will help you. You can always connect with somebody from our staff, totally free, to talk about your HR tech needs. They'll point you in the right direction. They're not trying to get you in a consulting project or anything like that. It's just something we do for free. We are closing in on doing 500 of these this year. And so we're buying people coffee when they sign up for these to get us over the line. So we have this goal that we're hard charging towards. And so you can go to this page and fill it out, or there's a link in the chat. There'll be a link in the follow-up email. Thanks, everybody. This is a great conversation. I love sharing information and learning from my fellow panelists. We're doing one of these every single month for the rest of time. And so if there are topics that you want to hear about, there are speakers you want to hear from, let us know, and we'll try to keep delivering some more impactful insights. The next one is about how do you do an amazing job in your new HR job. So first 90 days, how do you just kind of crush it? So yeah, we'll see you on the next one. And thanks again to Jeremy and Jackson. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.
Thanks.